Many people talk about the ups and downs of married life, but no one really prepares you for life after your spouse passes away. Welcome to Widowhood Real Talk with Tina, a safe place for widows, widowers, and their friends and family to talk about love and loss. Find comfort as you listen to honest conversations between Tina and invited guests who've experienced the loss of their forever partner. Share their stories of love, grief, and healing. You are not alone in this journey. Join today's episode and discover a wealth of resources and learn how to connect with others who are traveling the same path. This is Widowhood Real Talk with Tina.
Hello, Nina. Welcome to the Widowhood.
Hello, Tina, and thank you so much. It's an absolute honor to be here. I love your work, and I am so grateful for the opportunity to be here and with your audience.
Thank you for that. I'm like, all right, you trying to get me start crying? We just said hello.
I joke around that I make people cry for a living, so in the best way.
And I just want to say, I want to explain to the audience, listeners, and people that's part of this conversation with us. When we chose the name Widowhood, Real Talk with Tina, that name was intentional. Because even though this organization was birthed out of the passing of my late husband, he was my husband. But when we look at the hood, because I'm from Chicago, so hood means family. To me being the widow in my hood, that means that Mark was someone's brother. Mark was someone's uncle. Mark was my children's father. He was someone's friend. So every conversation that we have on the widowhood is that conversation from who was impacted by the hood. Everybody is impacted differently. It could have been his his health provider. It could have been his financial advisor, his lawyer. Even though the widow may be suffering, that person that she has lost has different relationships with other people outside of hers. And I think it's always important to have a conversation from different perspectives of that person that's no longer here. Their life may be complete, but we are still going through the process of enduring our life, living, experiencing in their absence. So I thank you for being open to have the conversation from your lived experience and the things that you are doing in this journey. But I want to ask a couple of questions before we get into maybe the reason why we're going to talk. Tell me about the butterflies that are behind you, because I am just, the blue one, and feel free to turn around. I want to, over there. Tell me about those and how you came about those.
Absolutely. I'll tell you about them. But at first, I want to acknowledge something you said, that a loss has such a big ripple effect and profound effect to everybody who loved the person. And so thank you for making space for these conversations. In my case, I did not lose, I'm not a widow yet, hopefully not anytime soon, but I did lose my brother. He was my only sibling, and he's right behind me right there. So about the butterflies, those butterflies were a gift from my grandmother. She gave them to me when I was 16 years old. And I've had them since. It hasn't been, it's not like I have a close tie to butterflies or anything like that, but I do to these because they're special. They're something that she felt like she wanted to give me, and they remind me of her. And that big one in particular, I was moving and I told my husband, be careful with that one. And as soon as I said, be careful, he dropped it and he broke the wing. And I said, oh, I was so mad. And I was like, of course you would. But so in any case, I feel like it's symbolic of, life. Sometimes it's a butterfly with a broken wing, and it's still beautiful, and it still reminds me of my grandmother. So I feel like it's symbolic of her presence. They're beautiful, and I just like having them around.
I did not even notice that one was broken. And now that you said it, but that the beauty did not become less in even pain. I never saw that. And it is what we focus on sometimes. We can focus, now that's all I see, because I'm looking.
Now you see the broken wing.
Right, but who is not functioning with some type of broken wing?
Yeah. And I felt like that's so symbolic of life. And that happened also after my brother's passing. So I said, it feels real to what we're going through right now, very in line with what we're going through.
Wow. Yeah. So am I correct that you do a podcast also?
Yes. So I created and host the Grief and Light podcast, and similar to yours in that I like to give a voice to the griever's experience. And initially it started with me like exploring my own grief because at the time, so he passed September 11, 2019. And when I was looking for information, I didn't find anything about sibling loss. And whatever little information I found, it was usually somebody that passed like at very old age and somebody lost their sibling. I said, where are the people that lost their sibling like at my age, and what are the resources? And there was at the time nothing that I found. I found one online grief group, and it was just kind of all over the place. It was a lifeline at the time, but I said, why are these conversations not happening? There's no way that I can, I'm the only sibling that lost their brother or sister. So where are these conversations? And as I looked for more information, I realized sibling loss in particular is called forgotten mourners, where that's what we're addressed as, because everybody asks about our parents and everybody asks about anybody but us. And I always say in 5 years since my brother's passing, I can count in maybe two hands by now how many people actually checked up on me and asked me directly, how are you doing? Because it's such an interesting loss in the minds of people. They say, well, mom, dad losing child is more important than sibling losing sibling. And so there's a social hierarchy unspoken of. It's not something set in stone, but there's this understanding that the worst loss, quote unquote, is child loss, right? And through the years, I've learned that the worst loss is your own. It's whatever you're experiencing because it's the one that you're feeling. And I've even heard mothers saying, I've lost a son, but the worst one was the betrayal from my husband, pain-wise. So who am I to judge whether or not that's true? And who am I to say, no, that's not true. Your child should be more painful than this other situation. We just honor what is. And so the podcast was born out of me wanting to explore the conversation about grief and sibling loss. And I consider it, I used to joke around that it was my Batwoman signal to the world of like, where's my people? Where's my grief tribe? Where is everybody? Hello, universe.
Even in the most crazy, sort of bizarre, dark humor way. But we need community. We need that tribe. That is a huge component of someone being able to manage their grief. So I think that is very fitting.
Thank you. And it was like mic check is this thing on, hello, anybody, hello, universe, right? And next thing I know, I also created an Instagram account with the same name. And next thing I know, people are saying, me too, me too, me too, same here. Thank you for saying this, da, da, da. And the conversation went from me exploring my grief and sibling loss to there is like pent up energy of people who want to share their stories. There is a plethora. There is not enough time to share people's stories. And so I started saying, okay, yeah, you can come on the podcast. Let's have this conversation. And I noticed people not only want to talk about their loved one, of course, but the greater experience of grief as it is, not as we think it should be or how society expects us to grieve. And I realized very quickly there's a huge disconnect between the lived experience and the social expectation. And that got me even more curious. I'm a curious person by nature. I like to learn about other people, other cultures, something that's new to me. I just find it interesting and I want to know more. So as soon as I noticed that, I said, ooh, why is everybody saying they feel unseen? They feel judged. They feel that pressure to move on. They feel pressure to hide their feelings. They feel pressure to mask their reality and kind of hide out in a corner until they quote unquote feel better. I'm like, why is this the predominant experience? This is so weird when it should be the opposite. It should be a supporting of this person who is really trying to figure out who they are in this new context of loss. So I started interviewing people and reading books. And next thing I know, the podcast now features stories from different perspectives and people that have experienced multiple losses and people with different cultural backgrounds and different beliefs. And et cetera, et cetera. So that's where
Wow.
it came from.
If someone bumped into you in the laundromat and they said, my brother passed away,
Mm.
but I'm going to focus on making something good out of it right away, and that's what it's going to be my goal, what would you say to them?
First of all, I'm so sorry about the loss of your brother. I see you, or sister, who I didn't, whoever you lost. But more importantly, grief is an invitation to also slow down. It's good that you want to do something good, perhaps in their name or in their honor, but there is a process that we must honor after loss. I don't have any children, but I feel this analogy fits in this context. When woman, birthing person is going to have a child, they have 9 months to prepare, and there's all this literature about having children, and there's all these things that we know medically, and there's a care team and a spouse, and everybody celebrates it. And yet, when the person is going to give birth, that experience is so unique to that person, and 9 out of 10 times it doesn't go as planned, right? And so, and that's
Don't
something
give me
that catches us.
PTSD from that. Keep going.
Sure. So let's say, you carry the baby to term, the baby is born naturally, and, you have this new child. When a child is born, so is a mother. And when that experience happens, you are no longer the former version of yourself that existed prior to this creature being here, right? Death is like the other side of that, right? So in a way, it's like you are no longer this other person. It's not necessarily that your identity died. It's that it has evolved into something else. Speaking of butterflies, so it has evolved into something else, something new. And there's a period. You don't just wake up with a child one day and you're like, I know how to be a mother. No, it's like you have a learning curve with each child, and each one is different. Each one brings its own challenges. So same with loss. Each loss brings its own challenges. And so if you lost a sibling and you want to do something right away, that is wonderful. And by all means, channel your energy in a way that's joyful to you and empowering to you. That's great. At the same time, I would invite you to slow down and honor the process of grief, because there are parts of you, whether you realize it or not at this moment, that are going to be evolving in ways known and unknown. And the loss always ripples out into all parts of our lives in ways known and unknown.
I like that. What is your favorite color?
Blue.
It is? Okay, it is blue. My favorite color is purple. It's just that sometimes I wear it all the time. It's like, okay, I try not to do it all the time, but I could wear purple. Like no one.
So funny enough, my if you look at my page and my brand and my logo and everything is purple.
Yes.
And I have actually grown very fond of the color purple. But that came because nature was very healing to me in my grief journey. And one of the moments that I felt peace was sunsets, like watching a sunset. Particularly, my brother passed in September, so I live in Miami. So we don't get that very cold winters. We get like a milder version of winter here. And it's one of the most pleasant times temperature-wise. So I remember staring into nothingness. Grief, so much of grief is just staring blankly at anything. Right? And I remember in the evenings looking at the sunset, and the colors go from like blue and yellow to like the purple and orange. And that brought me so much peace. So I said, I want to capture that, whatever that is, into the work that I'm doing. And so I found this gorgeous photo of like a sunset and a lighthouse and the purples. And I said, this is the one, perfect. And it evolved into like, if you look at anything that I do with grief and light, it's all purple. And I absolutely love it. I think it's just it's like spirit. To me, it feels spiritual. It feels rich. It feels peaceful. It feels like I could breathe again.
I like that. Your brother's name, would you share it with us?
Absolutely. His name's Joseph, and he's right behind me.
Can you bring him up? Can we see his picture a little bit, if you don't mind sharing him with us? Yeah.
This is a picture of him. He was under a tree, and I love this picture because he loved nature, and he knew how to enjoy the mundane. He knew how to enjoy the simplicity of life. He even had a phrase for it. He said, when he was happy, he said LLPs. And I was like, what is that? So life's little pleasures, life's little pleasures. And so that is something that I've adopted as a way of life, just finding the magic in the mundane, the joy in the everyday things, and enjoying life's little pleasures. And whenever I feel overwhelmed, like life is going too fast, like I'm running on fumes, I remind myself to slow down and it's kind of like, slow down and smell the roses kind of thing. So I literally slow down. I'll go for a walk. I'll make it a point to stop somewhere. I think that's really important. Physically stop somewhere, ideally somewhere in nature. Like I said, I live in Miami, so we have access to the beach here. So I'll take a pause, look at the water, and just take a moment to remember him, breathe in the air, and just know that at the end of the day, we're still connected in ways that I don't understand. But that's irrelevant. We're still connected. That's all that matters.
Wow. What is your funniest memory of Joseph?
Oh my God. He was so funny. He was, and that's what I miss most. A little side note, my mother, father, and I are very similar in personality. And we're kind of this heavier, heavier type, more serious type personalities just by nature. Very analytical, very overthinking everything. He was the lightness. He would say the most random things. I think that's what I miss most. He would take an ordinary moment and randomly blurt out something that it's like, what? Where did that come from? What are you doing? And it's just, he knew how to bring lightness to the world. I'm looking at his picture right now as I'm saying this, but he knew how to bring lightness to life. So one particular moment, I don't know, it's silly things he would say. It's not one thing. It's the way he would be at Thanksgiving, the jokes he would say, while we're driving together, or if I was stressed out, he would say the one thing that would get me laughing immediately. He just knew how to bring that lightness to life.
Wow. What is your first memory of Joseph?
Thank you for that question. Oh my gosh. I'm about to cry.
Well, good. I'm paying it forward then.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Oof. I was 3 years old. We lived in Puerto Rico, Mayagüez, Puerto Rico, where he was born. And I remember this because I was 3 years old and my mom is very pregnant, about to give birth. And I remember her telling me to go to sleep because it's the next day already. And I was like, what do you mean it's the next day? And she showed me the clock and it said, you see, it says 12. That's midnight. Right now it's the next day. And I was like, what do you mean it's the next day? Because it's dark outside. It's nighttime. So she's trying to explain this concept. And she said, your brother's going to be here soon. Tell him good night and go to sleep. So we could go. She's trying to get me to go to bed. And so my first memory of him is me putting my hand on my ear on my mother's belly and just listening to him in there and just telling him I can't wait to meet you. That was my very first with him physically with us. The next one was when they brought him home. He had a little white outfit that my parents got for him. My mother was wearing a blue, actually kind of like that blue dress. And I remember the color reflected in his eyes. So I thought his eyes were blue. I said, oh my gosh, he has blue eyes. She's like, no, it's my dress. And she tried to explain it to me. And I just remember saying oh, my brother has blue eyes. So that was my other first memory of him.
Wow. What did he do to get on your nerves?
He marched to the beat of his own drum, which is something I absolutely loved. But whenever we needed to get things done, he marched to the beat of his own drum.
You cannot rush him. He's over there, la, la, la. You're like, we're on schedule. We have things to do. And he's like, ah.
Yes, he literally just did his own thing all the time. So that drove me a little crazy. And it's interesting because now what drove me crazy then is something that I admire. And I almost feel like he understood what life is supposed to be about. He innately understood why we come here. And he kept it so simple that it was annoying to me back then because I'm more analytical. I'm more no, this is the way things are supposed to be, or I used to be. This is the path you need to take. You're falling behind. You are not doing this. And so I would get very frustrated, not understanding that I can say this now in retrospect, but there's a divine plan to all of this. And he was living his life the way that it was supposed to be lived. And I didn't see that. So what annoyed me has now become something that I cherish and honor, and has helped me understand that everybody has a certain mission here while they're here. And just because it looks different doesn't mean that they're wrong. And you just have to honor everybody's path.
Wow, that is a huge lesson. It sounds like a lesson that has impacted every fiber of your being.
All of it.
Because people often say, well, we're all going to die. It's just part of living. That statement seems very cavalier until it's someone very close to you.
Very. When
you heard the word grief before Joseph passed, what did grief mean to you?
It didn't really, it was like, oh, you're sad about something. Like it wasn't something it didn't hold any particular meaning other than a word. We lost our uncle early on. He passed unexpectedly when we were children. And I remember feeling sad. I remember, it changed our lives. It changed my grandparents. I remember my dad being sad, but it was never anything super life altering to us. My dad had this beautiful explanation for what happened. He said he took a solid cup, and then he grabbed a see-through cup. He poured water in the solid cup, and he said, well, your uncle, the one that's solid is his body, and the water is his spirit. And then he said he pours the water in the see-through cup, and he says his spirit is somewhere else, but now we can't see him physically, but he still lives on. And so at the time we were kids, we're like, oh, okay, great. That makes absolute perfect sense. Thank you for clearing that up. And so our grief was more because obviously we would miss our uncle, and we didn't understand it was the first time we experienced our family crying. And so it was like, whoa, that was a little bit shocking. Other than that, thankfully, I am incredibly blessed to have all four of my grandparents still alive and well. Both of my parents still alive and well. My aunts and uncles alive and well. So we hadn't experienced, other than my uncle at early age and great grandparents and in their old age, we had not experienced a significant loss. My brother was the one.
If I'm hearing correctly, thank you for sharing that. Your dad's brother was the uncle that passed.
Correct.
Have you ever spoken to your dad about sibling loss?
Yes. After my brother died, I realized, I said, you lost your brother.
Had a different perspective now.
Mm-hmm. And then I said, how long did it take you? And he said, oh, about 2.5 years to come back to myself. And then I'm replaying my life when I guess I didn't even notice he was grieving, because he was very stoic. He's very, to himself. So I'm replaying my life, and I was like, oh my gosh, maybe when he was angry, he was grieving, or maybe all these things that played out in our life, he might've been grieving. Now it makes sense now. So yeah. And he was the same age. He was 62 when my brother passed. His father was 62 when his son passed. So that was an interesting coincidence.
Very much so. Have you ever had your dad as a guest on your podcast?
Yes, actually, he was my first guest.
I have to go back and look at that.
Yes, he was my first guest. We did an episode for Father's Day, and it's interesting because that's interesting you bring that up. When he was telling his side of the story, I asked him all the questions, and I said, forget I'm your daughter, pretend I'm a stranger, just talk.
Yeah, that's going to be possible.
No, but he was sharing things, and I'm like, that's not how I remember it, and it made me very aware that we all remember things differently. And that doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It's just that he's viewing that moment in time from his perspective, and I'm viewing it from my perspective. And it's the proverbial, what is it? If four blind people grab an elephant from different parts.
My sister and I are just talking about that, and you see it from different perspectives. You're all seeing. Yes, that is exactly. It's the elephant and you're blind, and people touching it and describing it from the perspective in which they are experiencing that elephant in their blindness.
So if somebody grabs the trunk, they'll describe it one way. If I grab the leg, I'll describe it a different way. So it was a beautiful exercise because one, I got to hear his perspective, and I got to get my podcaster legs going, but also because it made me realize anybody that I interview is telling the story from their perspective. I guarantee you, if I bring in their family members, the story will change in one way or another. And so it taught me to honor the memory as the person recalls it. And if something was true to them in that moment, then something was true to them in that moment. It's not for me to question that. I can ask questions about it, but it's not for me to question the validity of their recalled memory.
Well, your dad gave you a gift in that.
Yeah.
You make me curious of the dynamics of a family unit grieving Joseph all differently. How has your family learned to navigate that?
Thank you for that question too. My dad is more quiet to the heart. My mother and I talk about it to this day, every day, all the time. My dad is open to talking about it. It's not that he won't, but he's definitely more reserved. My mother and I talk about signs, dreams, memories. We share pictures all the time. There's license plates that, occasionally have his initials. And so she'll take a picture of the license plate and send it to me like, oh, I saw him here. Well, he's very much a part of our daily existence still. And my dad is a bit more reserved about that.
And it sounds as if you respect your dad's
100%. Yeah. One thing that was very shocking, and thank you for bringing that up. When I joined the siblings group early on, and it really shocked me. Two things really shocked me. One, how angry people were at their sibling for passing away, because I felt nothing but love. Like, I have yet to feel angry at my brother. I never felt angry. I never blamed him. It was sudden. It was unexpected. It was traumatic, but there's an understanding that life's, and was just his time. And I just deeply understood that. So I wasn't angry at him for leaving, but I was surprised at how many siblings were very, very upset to the point of saying, I hate this person for leaving, or, fill in the blank. There was a lot of anger and pain in their statements. That surprised me. And then the second thing that surprised me is how much the siblings blamed, and these are adults, I say siblings, but we're adult siblings, how much they blamed their parents for grieving the way they did or did not. So specifically, a lot of siblings blaming their mothers for grieving too long and neglecting them, right? And I was like, your mom's not neglecting you. Your mom lost a child, and so that confused me a little bit, because I said, there is pain in not being seen and acknowledged and witnessed as a sibling, as a bereaved sibling. We also have to extend grace to our parents who are trying to process the loss of a lifetime, and the fact that they have a lived experience with this sibling of yours that goes beyond your experience with your sibling. You were not the one who carried them in your womb. You're not the one that gave birth to this human. You're not the one that dreamt up the future plans that they imagined, so there's a lot of grace we need to extend to our parents as well.
I thank you for sharing that. So many times I think people are wanting to define their grief experience by seeing someone else do it the way they're doing. And people try to say they're not doing it correctly, right, because it doesn't look familiar. My situation is obviously different. My loss of my husband caused me to shut down. I looked back at a text thread between my children and I, and the gaps of silence, where I did not have the energy to barely think of myself, get out of the bed sometime. My children were adults. They were they were out of the house. My son was in the military when my husband passed, and Mark passed in March, and my daughter went in May into the military. So we went from a household full of people, November 2016, to now May 2017. I am in the house by myself.
Wow.
And it was very silent. And it was around Christmas time, I want to say October, November, that I finally started coming out of it a little bit and going, good gosh, these children have lost their dad and their mom had nothing to give them. And I apologized to them. I said, I'm sorry that I was barely getting by myself. And the idea of trying to carry you or say something, I didn't have anything. And I know that it's okay that I felt that way. And being honest with them gave them space to talk about how their dad's passing impact them without some type of being pretentious, that they could just be honest about it. When you hear the word grief and wearing a mask, what type of mask do you feel like you have worn during your grief journey?
That's a wonderful question. I want to acknowledge something that even if those months went by, you still had that self-awareness, and that's a gift in and of itself. So I feel like you, and it sounds like, I don't know the details, but it sounds like they also gave you some grace in that along the way, or hopefully they did.
They did. I still carry the regret that I didn't have the capacity to show up like they are accustomed to their mother showing up. But I realized, good gosh, who could have? I mean, yes, you want to have on your cape and you want to show up like regular, but you're like, oh, this has knocked me off my feet. I have nothing. But I've never known myself to be in that space, but I never knew for my husband not to be here. But yes, they extended me grace. And even when I bring it up now, they're like, Mom, it's okay.
Yeah.
And because they know and they've seen that. And in fact, the end of 2023, I want to say the last episode of 2023 was a conversation with my son, speaking about his dad. And the last podcast for 2024 is a conversation with my daughter speaking about her dad. And that conversation came up again, and they're like, okay, Mom. So yes, they have. Right.
Well, it sounds like they're wonderful, and I'll look for those conversations. I'm curious. We lose our parents in a way too, and it's understandable. It's okay. I think it would be weirder not to, if everything just was completely normal, quote unquote, after such a significant loss. I think that change and that loss of how our parents used to be is part of this ripple effect of the loss of our sibling or our main person, your husband. So about the masks, I think and it's something that you spoke of on a recent post about, like, not honoring the reality of the loss. When the way that it looked for me is I tried to make it so my brother's absence wasn't so profoundly felt. So what that looked like in practice was, so he passed September, the holidays were coming up a few months later. I bought gifts from me and him. So I said, oh, this is from my brother, this one's from me. And I did that for about a year. So Mother's Day, Christmas, Mother's Day, birthdays, all the things, I kept buying gifts. And I'm like, this is something he would have given you, and this is something from me. And I would assign it from him, and I would put a picture of him, and he would be in everything. And I realized later it was my way of needing to know that my parents were not going to die too, if that makes sense. Like, I wanted their pain to be so softened that at the end of the day, it was like, I need you to live, please, because I thought they were going to leave me too. And so I said, if maybe I make it so like they're still receiving gifts, there's a part of my brother still very much alive with us, and maybe their pain is not so bad that they're going to leave. And then one day I was, trying to find a gift on his behalf, and I said, I don't know if he would have given them this. I'm making this up in my own mind. Like, this is not true. This saying he would have given you this is factually untrue. And it dawned on me that I'm not doing this for him, and I'm not doing this for them. I'm doing it for me. And so then I stopped and I said, that's not my rule anymore. And I'm working so hard to keep my mom happy. And in doing so, or my dad and my parents happy. And in doing so, there's a part of them that I know is trying to do the same. We were playing normal when nothing about this is normal. And the moment we decided to unmask, or like I told my mom, hey, I don't feel like celebrating this time. And is it okay if we just order Chinese food and like not do anything for Christmas? And she's like, oh, thank God you said that. And so then I realized we're all pretending for each other because they wanted me to feel okay. I wanted them to feel okay. And while I also honor the loving intention and the intention of protecting ourselves underneath all of that, I found it more helpful to let people have their pain. We are sad. This person not being here is very sad, and it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to not pretend like it's okay, and it's okay to not give 2 gifts pretending like my brother would have given her that. If it feels appropriate 1 or 2 times, that's fine, but it's not something that you should take on as like a personality trait or like a must or a to-do list. So that was a way of masking and unmasking within the family. Outside of that, I mean, at work, you have to put your shield on, and you don't have to. That's what I did. I just kind of, and one comment broke that through that shield, and I was never the same. And I couldn't even put the mask back on because the mask was broken. And it was this colleague who was talking about something random. And then she says, by the way, now that you're an only child, blah, 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 blah. And then her words kind of faded to the background. I said, what did you say? She said, now that you're an only child. And then it felt like a punch to the gut, because I said, what do you mean I'm an only child? You just attacked my identity. I didn't say this to her. This conversation was happening in my own mind, but it felt like very guttural. You had just attacked my being, because one of my life's privileges, one of my favorite roles is being Joseph's sister. And I say is because I feel like I continue to be his sister, even in this context after he's no longer with us. And so it's like, for you to remove that piece of me, that identity, that part of me that I hold so dear. And you said it like, what do you want for lunch? Like, it was such a casual comment. Like, it was so nonchalant. And she had no idea that she had destroyed who I felt I was in that moment. And so after that, I doubled down and I was like, I am his sister. Like, you just attacked me, you attacked him, you attacked my memory, you attacked who I am. And she didn't. It was just how I felt. That's how I received it. But part of the mask was pretending like everything was okay at work and like this didn't happen and not talking about it. And after that, I was very vocal about it. Actually, I think that after that, the podcast, that helped bring the podcast about, because I said, no, this is not how it works. And people need to know that this is not how it works.
I love that. In a very nonchalant way, It made you stand up to what you may have not been really paying attention to. And it is interesting, as you say, and just some of the similarities in the passing of a loved one. I will always consider myself Mark's wife. I will always be his widow. Someone may say, well, you've remarried. And until they tell me he came back to life, then I want you to explain that to me, how I'm still not his widow. I want that to make sense to me, that their absence, this life we've lived together, these experiences, these memories, they exist. They have not been wiped away. Did it take you some amount of time to look at memories of Joseph or pictures as you looked at his picture with such endearment? Was that always from the moment he passed? Because I speak to some people and they say it's hard to look at pictures afterwards.
No, so I'm sure you're familiar with continuing bonds, like death ends a life, but not a relationship. And from day one, I felt like I was still his sister, and that was something that I would embrace fully. And not only did we look at pictures, but on Christmas and then on his anniversary. Yeah, I'm trying to remember the timeline. I created videos. My memory of our mother is her carrying the VCR cameras that were like this big in the 80s and 90s.
Yes.
And she had this VHS tape like stuck to her head because she would record everything. And we thought it was so annoying. We're like, why are you recording everything? Thanks to her doing that, we have stories upon stories, decades upon decades of film.
Have you digitized those?
We spent the first year digitizing them.
Yes, good.
And because of that, and because I naturally take a lot of photos, I was able to do every year on his anniversary, I do a video of like photo montage. And thanks to her having the VCR on her shoulder for 20 years, we have these beautiful homemade movies of his life. And so I create these home movies that is a way to honor him. So yeah, we look at pictures, we exchange pictures, we create the movie. He's very much like visually alive in our lives still.
You know, I digitized the VHS, but I have not pulled them out in a while and done something like that. No, I just a lot of different things life happened, not intentionally like ignoring them. It's like these were the things I needed to do to capture. There was a list like these VHSs are VHSs, they are old, and if I don't do something with them now, we'll lose this forever. So it was like, need to find out how to digitize that, check, need to do all these. So it was just this list of all these things that I needed to make sure took place. Now it's like, I need to go back and go back to that. You just reminded me that I did it. It's in a box. I know where it is, but I haven't done anything with it. And I need to pull that out. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Absolutely. And it's such a treat. It is such a treat. It makes you cry, of course, and it makes you long for the person. And at the same time, it makes you laugh and it makes you almost feel like you're spending time with them. Something really interesting happened the 5th year, which was this year. I was going through the tapes, and each year I try to switch it up so it's not like the same thing over and over. So I was going through some of the tapes that I hadn't seen in a while. And my mom says, oh, what about this clip? And it's him singing some song in his like elementary school or something. And so when I'm putting the clips together, I listen to the song that he's singing, and it's a Spanish song. And the lyrics, I'm not going to sing it, but the lyrics essentially say, I will live and I will die. And when I'm gone, let me go because I'm going to be all right. And I was like, first of all, who allowed this song for
that's a birthday song? I'm like,
thank you. I was like, oh, it's actually very upbeat and funny. And it was supposed to be for like Spanish class. So they're supposed to like learn Spanish. And I'm like, who approved this song? Number one. Number two, I felt like it was a message that he was saying, I'm okay and let me go. It is time to let me go. Right. And it's not let go like I'm never going to think of you again. It's just like, you can stop worrying if I'm okay. That's what we felt. And I said, we've had this for over 30 years. And this is the first time that we're seeing this on his 5th year anniversary. And it gave me chills. And I said, Mom, the song. And she's like, what song? And I'm like, what do you mean, what song? And so I had her listen to it. We replayed it. And she said, oh my gosh, like, she's like, I didn't send it to you because of the song. I just thought the clip was cute. Like, I didn't even listen to the lyrics. So then we looked up the song, and the full version has so many more messages. And I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like he's talking to us through this song. And it was bittersweet, but like, it gave us so much peace. And it gave us this feeling of he's okay. He's okay. And we can live our lives. And part of the message was continue to live your life, please. I'm okay. And I'm like, how do you explain that? How do you explain things like that?
I have no explanation, but it does lean to the question, and you may have answered this already, the signs that you feel like your loved one shares with you. What other signs do you feel like Joseph has sent you in this journey?
The most beautiful signs. And I want to share this also acknowledging that a lot of people are desperately seeking signs and they don't get them, right? So I want to honor that sometimes, although I'm super excited about the signs and everything I'm about to share, I also want to honor that this is not necessarily something that everybody experiences, and that's okay. And sometimes it's because we need to open ourselves up, and sometimes it just takes a little bit of time, and that's okay. So just a little caveat there. We started experiencing signs from the first week, right? And so when he passed, a friend of mine, she had lost unfortunately, her son was stillborn. And so she was on this journey of trying to connect to her son's spirit, whatever that looked like to her. And so she introduced me to a book called Signs. And she said, you have to ask for them. And I was like, what? Who am I asking? Like, who am I talking to? And then she said, oh, just pick a sign. So I said, I want a blue jay to approach me. I don't know. That felt like a sign I wanted, right? I said, I will recognize the blue jay, and I want it to approach me. And I want it to be so obvious that it's unquestionable. So I mentally said that. I said, oh, worst case scenario, I don't see anything. Great. Like, at least I tried. So 2 days go by. I'm sitting in my grandmother's kitchen. My brother passed in my grandmother's house. So I'm sitting in my grandmother's kitchen, and I'm working. I'm on my computer working, and she has this this glass door that overlooks the backyard. And all of a sudden I hear like a tapping on the door. I'm like, what is that? And then I look over, and there's a blue jay tapping on the glass. And I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. Like, I felt like yes, I felt like cold, like somebody poured like a cold water on me. And I was like,
you're like,
oh my
wake up, wake up, wake up.
And my dad was like in the next room, and I'm like, dad. And I'm like screaming. I'm like, come here, but like slowly. And he ran over, and I was like, slow down. And we were moving enough to where it would have probably scared a bird away, right? It did not. It climbed onto the little ledge. It looked into the window, and it kept going like this. I had enough time to grab my phone and take a video of it. And I said, you have got to be kidding me. So then I walked towards it, and it just stayed there. And I looked at it, and I was like, are you it? Are you my sign? And it's like, I have no proof that it is, but I also have no doubt. So I'm like, I feel like this is pretty good. This is pretty literal, and this is pretty good. So after that, I said, I promised myself that I will at least be open to the possibility that this is a way of communicating. Shortly after that, I started having dreams, and he came to me in my dreams, and I decided to start writing them down on the notes section of my phone. And so I have a record in the last 5 years of over 200 dreams that I've had with my brother, and messages that he has shared through the dreams, some of which actually had real life consequences. And I'll quickly share one that is really powerful. So this was January. I had this dream January 2020. And I remember because it was right before the pandemic. And this dream, he's running. We're like in a valley. Think like Arizona, I guess, like in a valley, like red rocks. And he's running on top of these thorny bush. And he's running on top of it. I'm running behind him, and he's like, don't stop, just keep going, keep going, keep going. So we cross this thorny bush. We get to a valley. We see my uncle's ex-girlfriend there. I don't know why she was there, but she was into fitness. Like, she's doing yoga. In my dream, she's doing yoga, and there's a platform, and she's teaching us yoga. And my father is there, and my uncle's there, and they're in jeans. So we're all like getting ready to do yoga, and my dad's in jeans. I'm like, why are you doing yoga in jeans? Like, that's awful. And then so we're stretching, we're laughing, and I wake up, and I'm like, what the heck was that? Then I remember feeling that the message was, the future is going to require you to be flexible. This is like the message that I got from that dream. I put it aside. This is January. Like 2 weeks later, I get a job offer that I didn't ask for. I was working in real estate at the time. My manager calls me in. She says, I have this opportunity. I don't know how you're feeling, but give it a shot. I go to the interview just to be open. They hire me on the spot, and they expect me to start right away. I panicked. I said, I'm sitting here with the CEO. He's telling me quotas, numbers, expectations, all these things. Internally, I am panicking. I'm like, I'm not ready. This is too much. I'm about to cry. And so I didn't want to cry in front of him. So I avert my gaze, and I look away from him for a second, just so I could collect myself. And then when I noticed the suite number, I was seeing it backwards because it's through the glass, and it said 119. My brother died on 9/11. So I'm like, 119, 911. Maybe I'm supposed to be here, right? So that, for whatever reason, calmed me down. I collect myself. I said, what were you saying? And, we continue the conversation. He hires me. I start working. I get very overwhelmed again. And I say, this is too much. It's too soon, too much. I speak with the vice president, the liaison between my company and this developer. And I tell him, I'm so sorry. I said yes too soon. I'm not ready. My apologies. I'll figure out a way to make this up to you. He puts his hand on my shoulder, and he says, you just have to be a little flexible. Like, it's just going to require you to be a little flexible. When that man said the word flexible, that dream came like flooding into my mind. And I said, I'm supposed to be here. Like, I have no question that I'm supposed to be here. It's like the number, this thing, the feeling. Okay. I said, okay, fine. This was February. A month later, we get the shutdown for COVID. This was March 2020. And the director at the time, we didn't know how long it was going to last. We didn't know what was happening. He said, I promise everybody that as long as I'm able to, I will pay your full salaries through the duration of all of this. I just ask that you give me some grace in how we manage this. Thanks to that man, and thanks to sticking, thanks to not quitting because of these signs, I was able to pay off all our debt, because we weren't leaving. We were just working from home and, pay off all our debt, pay our rent, not have to worry about losing anything. We came up at a surplus. I actually had some downtime to be able to slow down. I know COVID was awful for a lot of people, so I don't want to romanticize it. I know it was awful. Thankfully, we didn't lose anybody during that time. So from my experience, it was a very welcomed pause. How you lose somebody and you wish the world would just stop. It literally did. So it was like, whoa, what is happening? And all certainty went out the window about anything in life. Everything was changing, and it worked out in the end. So I started to trust whatever messages came my way through dreams, through signs, through this, through that. And ever since then, I say it's a language I've learned to develop with his energy. It's not to say he's not the bird. I'm aware he's not the blue jay. I'm just saying that there is something beyond our understanding that connects us beyond life and death. And I care less about why or how. I care more that it just happens and that it feels like a connection of some sort. And I welcome it.
You can get caught up in the why and everything else. Get to the important part. Everything else is kind of irrelevant. I can see that. And when it proves to be true, and it proves to be something you could never have fathomed, made up, considered, or did for yourself, accept it for what it is. I can see that.
Yeah.
In your grief journey, how have you felt judged?
How have I felt judged? I'll give you an example. Second year, January 2021. Yeah, January 2021. So it's about 2 years since my brother was passing, and a former colleague calls me and she says, hey, let's meet up for coffee. Just want to catch up. So we meet up for coffee. We're talking. She's like, how were your holidays? And I tell her they were okay, but it was tough. It was very difficult, and it's really hard to see all the changes. And I'm very honest about my answers. And her response was, still? It's been almost 2 years.
And that's where someone gets throat punched, like in your mind they do.
In my mind. And in my mind, I just went like this, like, okay, you're done. We're done here.
You're kind of...
But it shocked me a bit coming from her, because if she was a stranger and she said that, great. But I'm like, you know me, what I've been through, and you went to my wedding, me. So it was it was a reality check about the social expectations of how long somebody should be grieving. So in her mind, 2 years is like, you should be done by now, girlfriend. What are you doing? And in my mind, 2 years is a blink. It's a blink in a lifetime, because it feels like forever and yesterday all at once. And it made me realize that when people say take your time, they mean that very subjectively. And your time is really their timeline in their mind. And it also tells me they have no idea what grief is actually like. They have no idea. And kind of got quiet after that. I said, I'm not going to share. It was a valuable lesson in that I said, I'm going to share with people who I feel get it. Otherwise, they don't need to know. People are not privy to the details of your lived experience. You have agency. It taught me, I have agency in what I share, who I share it with, and in what context. And not everybody, your information in your life is not for public consumption. And I have a podcast. I share a lot, but even then,
I was gonna say they have to be worthy. They have to be worthy to hear your story and to hold 100%. That space for you.
Yeah.
This wasn't a question, but now it is. What are some of the things that people say to the grieving that just I'm just going to just go all of that. Give me all of that from your perspective.
I didn't mean to eye roll, but.
Oh, no, it is an eye roll situation. It's a cringe. It's like.
Yeah.
No, it should be an eye roll. Do tell.
Okay, so the worst thing is the platitudes. They're in a better place. God needed another angel. It's for the best. So it's all these sayings that sound good. They sound like a little bumper sticker that would be like a nice to throw at somebody. That is actually awful, 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 and it negates the experience. You feel like you're going to like alleviate their pain with this bumper sticker you just flung at their face, and it's like, no, you just flung something reckless at their face and caused more injury and literally confirmed that you are not to be trusted anymore with information. And that sounds very harsh, but death, the aftermath of losing a loved one, how people respond becomes a litmus test to whether or not they get to play a role in your life from now on. And I feel like that is important because I had friends who said things that were hurtful, but I knew that they were trying. They were just trying imperfectly. They were stumbling over their words. They were saying things that was like, "Ooh, you almost got that right, but you missed the mark here a little bit." But they were trying from the heart. Versus, I had a guest on the podcast, her son unfortunately died by suicide, and they were a very religious family. They were part of the religious community. Their faith played a big role, and they had certain standards and conversations and interactions with their immediate community, and they were very tight-knit. And she says that her neighbor gave her something that said, like, life is about learning to dance in the rain. And then she said, I wanted to take that thing and like chuck it at her face. It's like, what dancing in the rain? My son just, died by suicide. What are you talking about? And it's so out of touch. I think that's what it is. It is so out of touch and so just try. It just tells me you're not trying to understand. And when a lot of people say, I don't want to imagine, correct, you don't want to. But in this context, try, use your imagination and just try. Even when you try, you're not even going to compose, but try, because when you try, your words change a little bit. What you would have said, what you say when you don't imagine, when your default is, oh, I can't imagine, whatever follows that statement is extremely out of touch. And I guarantee you it will harm the person. When you take a second to put yourself in the other person's shoes, you will still not understand, but I guarantee you whatever you were going to say before will shift a little bit into something more attuned to the experience. So put in the effort, please, and thank you, to try to put yourself in the other shoes, knowing full well you'll never understand unless you've actually gone through the experience. We need to be careful with these platitudes. And in the case of the example that I gave, she said the religious community also used Bible verses that were very well intentioned because it's scripture. It is written, right? And she said, in the context of grief, it does not apply. And if you read some of the scripture, it's Jesus wept. Jesus wept. He had that moment of putting himself in the other person's shoes and weeping with them or weeping for the situation, because sometimes there are no words. And it's just when you go there, you feel it. And so this is not to talk about scripture, because I am in no place qualified. Taking it back to platitudes, just general statements, it's the same concept. It is more powerful to say nothing and just hug a person and let your energy and your body do the talking than it is to say anything. There are no words. There truly are no words. So there are plenty of us trying to update the records on these conversations. If you want to help somebody in grief, listen to the Widowhood podcast, listen to the Grief and Light podcast, listen to do a little bit of research. One of the top things you'll find is what not to say to a griever and then what to say to a griever, right? And how to help. So perhaps do a little bit of digging there and find a different way to show up. And its presence is more important than words.
Thank you. I was going to ask you for some recommendations. Did you say that when Joseph passed and you looked for different sibling groups, that there was a grief support group that you went to for siblings?
Yes.
And how did that help? And why do you think it helped for you?
It helped because they understood what I was saying without me having to delve into the details. And there's healing power in that. There's healing power in being witnessed and understood. And I'm sorry that they understand. I wish nobody understood me in a way, but we're human. And so long as we're human, these things will happen. And it's wonderful medicine to connect with others on your journey. And I think it's important to do it with people who have experienced a similar loss. So I can talk about, to somebody about losing their parent, but I haven't lost my parent yet. So at a visceral level, I don't understand. I will someday perhaps, but I don't understand. They won't understand what it's like to lose a sibling. They can empathize, but they won't get it quite the same. So that's not to say that we can't help those people. And sometimes that emotional distance is helpful because you can kind of remain centered. I don't know if this happens to me, but I find that when I talk to siblings and if there are elements that are too close to mine, it starts activating me. My body feels shaky. I start losing my train of thought. I become nervous, and it's like my body's remembering. They're activating something within me, a core memory that is activating my nervous system. And then I'm not as neutral as I probably should be. So it's about learning how to create that distance. I call it like an emotional callus. It's not becoming calloused. It's just more like developing a little bit of a thick skin around that particular area whenever possible. And then being really honest when the boundaries are blurred. But being in a peer group, and I've heard this over and over and again, and I've heard it from therapists who do this for a living. They said, I trained on grief. That went out the window when I lost my mother, or that went out the window when I lost my husband. It's like and I wanted to pause here because I don't want to like discredit any of the research that's been done. There are some tools that are very helpful, but the lived experience is not a clinical. Grief is a natural, normal human response to loss and life-altering change. It is the human response. It is our divine programming, if you will, of how to feel our emotions after a loss. So trying to put a clinical prescription or model or steps or whatever it is into a lived experience, it just does not work. That's like trying to make love clinical or something like, these are the steps to love. It doesn't work that way. So neither does grief. So finding people who understand is powerful, powerful medicine. And it's one of the things I suggest people do, however it's accessible. Thankfully, now we have the online group. So we have people literally from all over the world connecting over their loss.
Thank you for sharing that. If you could speak to Nina now, this version of you could speak to Nina the week that Joseph passed, what would you tell her?
You're still his sister. And you'll always be his sister. And he's still there. And you still talk to him. And life through his lens, like adopting his lens of how he saw life, will help you find joy again.
How long did it take you to learn that?
3.5 years.
Yeah. You explained to me what grief looked like before Joseph passed. And we've kind of touched around it, but how is grief different to you now?
Grief then didn't have as much meaning. I had no lived experience to relate to it. So after he passed, initially the first 2 years were awful, upside down, nothing made sense. It was grief, bereavement, and sorrow all in one. The third year, 3.5 years later, it started to separate, and I started to realize grief is a language and it's a container for our lived experience of loss. In and of itself, it's not a good or bad thing. It just is. It exists. And when we lean into it, when we listen, not with our ears, but with our heart, mind, spirit, and body, and try to understand what it has to tell us, this happened, you will be grieving. There is wisdom in grief. Allow it to talk to you. So when you start developing that language that you only hear with your heart, you don't hear it with your ears, and you realize nothing is happening to you, like this didn't happen to you. It wasn't a personal attack on life or a heavenly attack on you. It's just life, and this happened. What now? You get to define how you make meaning. You get to define how you move forward. So whenever you find your footing again, because there will be a period where you just don't know left from right, up from down. So after you allow yourself that time and you find your footing and you say, okay, where was I? What now? Allow grief to transform your life in every way, because it is not there to hurt you. It is not attacking you in any way. It is changing your life profoundly. And what is sad will be sad. And also you could use this to rewrite what your future looks like, because your life was on one track before this happened, and your dreams and aspirations were set in stone and looked a certain way before this happened. Now that that's no longer an option, what will you make of your life? And then that's the space where we get to write whatever needs to happen. So I choose to do that, carrying Joseph's love light forward. I'm borrowing that expression from somebody who was a guest on the podcast. And she said, we get to carry their love light forward. I love that. And I say, great, that's what I'm going to do now. And I personally believe we will meet again. So that's not a belief everybody holds, but that gives me comfort. And I believe that every day is one day closer. And in the meantime, I'm going to enjoy this existence as much as possible and make the most of it.
I love that. I love that for you. I love that for Joseph. I love that for your family. As I watch you laugh, I often see people unaware that someone is laughing and grieving. What are some dualities where people say, well, I'm sure she's sad about this. Like some people may say, she's always sad about Christmas, but it may be the day that you remember that Joseph stole your ice cream when you were kids and you see other kids playing. What are some ways that your grief shows up in spaces that people really would not know that because it's not under the traditional umbrella of grief?
It shows up all the time. First, I want to part from the premise that I learned that grief is this and that. It's not this or that. So grief is living in the both and. So if we have a Venn diagram, we are living in the middle.
The duality, yes.
Two things being true at once. So my joy is like the other, like if you look at, this is how I visualize it. If you look at a Christmas ornament and it's round and it's flat and it starts spinning, right? One side is joy, one side is grief. One side is joy, one side is grief. Sometimes my joy triggers my grief. Sometimes my grief triggers my joy. Yeah. What that looks like, I was crying this morning. I was sobbing this morning because my soul profoundly misses my brother. And sometimes when I have interviews, when I have conversations like this, like I knew I had this conversation at the, in the later part of my day, and I have to mentally prepare, like emotionally prepare. And I know I'm going to be in this energy. This is more intense. I don't walk around every day talking this much about him. Knowing this was coming up reminds me of how much I miss him. And yet I love it because thanks to this conversation, thank you for this time together, I get to talk about him and I get to be in his energy. So I'm happy, I'm joyful. And I'll probably cry after this. And I'll probably cry tomorrow morning. And all of it is fine. All of it is perfectly fine.
Thank you for sharing that, because it costs us something to be here for humanity. Mm-hmm. It costs us something to share these memories and deep dive into these conversations for ourselves and also to help other people. Yes. So thank you for being so transparent to share that it costs you something emotionally. When you thought about this conversation and you being the guest and not the podcast host, were you thinking, if I were the podcast host, I would ask her this and we would make sure that we talk about this and make sure she covered? Were there any items like that that came to mind to you?
No, and I actually appreciate your questions. I guess nobody has asked me like, what was your first memory of him? So I'm always like, I wonder what question is going to come up that I wasn't expecting, right? And so like, what was your first memory of him? And that hit me at my core because that's my first memory ever. It's just of him. He was my first memory as a human being on earth. So it's kind of like I wasn't expecting those questions, but I try to stay open to whatever comes up, because thanks to your questions, I'm remembering things that are really out of sight, out of mind. And that was really special. So I wasn't thinking necessarily like, oh, I need to have these answers. It was more like, I wonder what will come up that I maybe like takes me aback a little bit. And so that was one of them, but I love it. So thank you.
Oh, nice. How is it being the guest versus the host?
Amazing. I mean, you make me feel very comfortable. Not everybody has the same, tact or flow with the conversation. Interviewing is not easy, so I want to give people grace as well. But you're such like a beautiful energy, and you make me feel comfortable, and you make it feel like this is such a natural part of the day. So I thank you. Yeah. You make me feel welcome and safe, and it's a joy to be here.
Oh, thank you. And isn't it supposed to be?
Yeah.
Isn't it supposed to be celebrating their life? Isn't it supposed to be something I shouldn't have to hide in the corner and do? Shouldn't it be, Joseph was an amazing brother. You love being his sister. And I say love, current tense,
yes.
Being his sister.
Present tense, yes.
And that's okay.
And that's okay.
We become the memories. And if we're not celebrating, if we don't get to honor them, there's a part, I think, that makes people hide and not want to be seen, because they're stuffing so much inside that they don't get to authentically, organically, and be true to how they feel, because that's looked at like, why are you still doing that? Because they are still no longer here. And 100%. I will grieve them some form of fashion until I leave this world. It may not look like it did that first week.
Right.
It changes, but life beckons us to continue moving forward, even if we want to or not. I remember getting up the first day and like, the sun got up?
I was so mad at the sun. Oh my gosh. And the moon. I was like, what are you doing?
Because it's one more day further away from that moment that I spoke to them last. And it's like, this is just going to continue.
And that feels very jarring. Like, I think the most puzzling thing is life still moves forward. Like, why? Why is it doing that? It's very surreal. It's very, very surreal.
It is. And it's beautiful at the same time.
Yes. And, I think it's David Kessler. He says, how long am I going to be grieving? Well, how long are they going to be dead? Like, it is what it is. It evolves as we evolve. That doesn't mean I'm going to be crying every day, but that person will always be a core part of who I am moving forward. And that's never going to change. I don't want it to change, and that's not going to change. And I met a bereaved mother. She said, oh, my son passed, I think it was 18 years. And I said, oh, so yesterday. And she stopped and she looked at me and she said, thank you for saying that. Because in our hearts, it's like that 9/11 moment, like, where were you in 9/11? In our hearts, they passed. When you think about that, it's almost like you're transported to that time. And everything that happens after that, there's an element of them in it. And I wouldn't want it to be any other way. I think it's beautiful. I think that's how we carry them forward.
When you said that, it made me think about different social media memories that come on my phone.
Yeah.
And now when some do not include Mark, I was like, that much time has passed.
Yeah.
It just like, wow. It has been 7 years, and there are still things that will happen. And this may sound bizarre to some people, that I go, he really died. Like, this thing happened. It's like, he really died.
Yep.
My daughter is engaged, preparing to get married. The reality of that. Different things will happen. And it's like, he will not be here in the version and form in which I know to be there for that.
Yeah.
And it takes forever getting used to that.
Well, you said that it takes your breath away every single time, over and over and over and over again, and in ways known and unknown. That's why we could try to foresee how it's going to impact us. We can't. There are things that are going to show up, and we're going to be like, they are not here. Like, this is real. This is real. And I've heard people, continues. I met a woman, she said she started grieving 30 years later, the loss of both of her sisters, because grief wasn't talked about. It was something that you shoved down and you didn't talk about it and you carry on and march on. So when her father passed, it unearthed the grief that she hadn't expressed for her sisters. And she said she knew for 30 years her sisters had passed, but she's like, oh my gosh, this happened. Like, this happened. I live with their granddaughters, and I still can't believe they're not here. So it's time is irrelevant in a sense, in the context of grief. Not irrelevant, but time is a little warped in the context of grief. And that's okay. It's sort of supposed to be that way because love doesn't really have a timeline. And so we'll feel this forever, I think. Maybe the pain softens, over time and there's more joy, but we'll feel this forever.
I can relate to that. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you a moment to put on your podcast host. Any questions of me in this conversation?
Well, first, thank you so much for allowing me this space. This has been wonderful. And this is how we get to love them. My question to you would be, how do you incorporate Mark's memory in your current relationship? And I'm not trying to be invasive. What I'm trying to say is, like, how do you reserve a room in your heart for him as you hold the duality of the current life you have now with another beloved?
And you can be invasive. I'm okay with that. Because if you sit down and say you're going to have a podcast conversation, we signed up to give an honest, authentic answer to the question asked. Yeah. A couple of different ways. One, I still carry Mark's last name. When we were about a month out from the wedding, and I was at work, and somebody said, so when are you going to change your last name? And I was like,
who said I'm doing that? Yeah.
Right? I was like, that's a thing. I mean, 20-year-old Tina, oh yeah, that was cute. But I was like, because in my mind, I'm not going to be in a world where my children don't have a parent with the same last name. Their dad is gone. In my mind, me changing my last name, for me, it felt like I was abandoning my children.
Wow.
And we never talked about it, but that was going to be a deal breaker for me if that was going to be an issue. Because I know some people, that is a very important thing for your spouse to have your last name. This is not a situation where I was divorced and ready to get a name back or do something. His name sounds like home to me. That is a part of 32 years of my life. So I was apprehensive about what this conversation would look like with Fred, and going, what if this is it? And I was like, we got to have this conversation because this could be a problem. And we were out, we were doing something, getting a vehicle fixed, and we went to this place, a restaurant, and we were sitting outside. I remember milkshakes and something. And I said, so I want to talk to you. And he goes, yeah, okay, why we got to have this I need to talk to you conversation? We're talking.
Like, what did I do now?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I said, what do you think about last names? And he looked at me so quickly. He said, like your last name? He said, your children wouldn't have a parent with the same last name. And I was like,
this is the one.
But then he said, and you kind of old to do that. I was like, didn't nobody ask you that? Didn't nobody ask you? He was like, changing your name as old as you are, I got to do all that. I was like, shh, you're ruining it. You're ruining it.
Right. The first one, that was perfect. Leave it there.
The birds were singing, the sky was opening up, and then he went. But I knew already, but this was just a further confirmation. I'm in a safe space. When I felt God prompted me to start this nonprofit for widowhood Real Talk with Tina, he has been my biggest cheerleader. He has been, okay, this is what you feel like you need to do to help other people. When we started the YouTube channel, he was contacting people. She needs 100 followers. And he's just getting people they could care less of one of. He was like, okay. He was like, send me the link. He made sure I had 100 followers. I think I had like 89. He was like, we're getting to that today. I've interviewed Fred on my podcast with another gentleman that married a widow and speaking about the experience of dating and marrying a widow. And I know for me, and from talking to other widows and widowers, that person that you partner with should have a lot of confidence in who they are. They should not have a space that they feel like they're in competition with the deceased. They should not, but at the same time, you as the widow or widower should be in a space that you realize that you're prepared to love two people. I will always love Mark. I will always love him. But that relationship in this timeline, in this reality, that ended. But just a few months ago, I received some documentation, and I thought I had processed. I'm a retired Army officer. I put things in place, all that. It's been 7 years. I feel like I've done everything I need to do. I'm living life, and I get this letter. You need to do such and such and such. I was like, I'm looking at it, and all of a sudden, I'm frozen. I have to go find birth certificate, death certificates, DD 214. All those in one sentence are just, and Fred's in his office, and I'm telling him what I'm looking at, and he takes the paper out of my hand, and he's like, just sit here on me. And he's like, it'll be okay. This is just another way of Mark being a good husband.
Wow.
And I cried a little bit, and I got up and went to the safe, found the documents, did the things that I need to do. And it was about a month and a half of processing these documents and doing things. And he was just like, it's going to be okay.
That is so beautiful. And it takes a real partnership, love, real love, and emotional maturity, and understanding that it's not a competition. Like there's room for, it's almost saying like, oh, which kids do you love more? I love my kids. Like I love all of them, and my heart is big enough for all of this. And I love that you didn't choose to not be Mark's wife, you know, and also that tie, that I didn't think about it that way. Thank you for that perspective of like, if you change your last name, your kids, they lose that tie. They will lose that tie. So what a beautiful way to honor him and honor that link and that forever bond, because it is a forever bond.
Yes.
And I love that you have such an amazing partner now. It's this and that. It's not this or that.
It is. And with the work that I do with Widowhood Real Talk with Tina being a registered 501c3, our goal is to have 100 families that we provide Christmas toys for. This year, we're doing it for the first year, Widowhood Secret Santa. And we have 5 families that have been chosen. And we're putting their Amazon wish list on our website. And you can just go there and purchase the gifts for them, and they go right to them. One of the other goals is to have an educational scholarship fund, and we will name that after Mark in some form or fashion, because oftentimes when a parent passes, either the remaining spouse needs to re-enter the workforce and may need new skills, or children's education may have been paused because that person may have been contributing factor to the financial stability of the family. So that is another way that we will honor Mark in the work that we're doing, because the bereaved is an underserved community. But when we look at the mental health impact of grief, then it goes, oh. And as you talk to therapists and mental health professionals, and as I have done so, oftentimes they can circle back someone's mental challenges, something that's not a DNA cause or how they're hardwired, but they can also often circle that back to a moment of unaddressed guilt that has spiraled into other different things that are manifesting in other negative behavior.
100%. And lost grief has a ripple effect in ways that can be beautiful. Like, oh, we get to do this, we get to love them. And in ways that can be, it's like adding insult to injury. Like you're already going through this horrible experience, through the pain and the emotional side of it. And now you have to deal with the illegalities and the instability. It's the secondary losses, the instability, the new identity, like if you have kids, and the loss of financial capabilities, all the things. It's really, really turns everything upside down. And we didn't, thankfully, had to deal with much with my brother. He was young and he didn't have, kids or family or anything like that. But sorry, I just had another thought. Like I'm going through this with my parents now. His death prompted my family to like get all the wills and all the arrangements in order. And it's not something we would have prioritized had this not happened. But my goodness, if you're listening or watching, please take this as your sign to get your affairs in order. Everybody that's left behind will greatly benefit from that. And doesn't matter if you have a lot of assets or few assets, it's an instruction for your wishes. And that has to be recorded with your county and your local state and all the things. So that is one of the biggest pain points for grievers. It's adding that insult to injury that your life has been turned upside down. And now you have to deal with the paperwork and the court systems and the money that you didn't expect to spend and that ripples in profound ways that could be very life altering in the negative sense.
I'm glad you mentioned that because it's so true. There are two different organizations that I've dealt with, and oh my gosh, one is Buried in Work. And they are really great at helping you with estate planning, putting things in order. And there is and just because I have the book right here, I am so glad that you mentioned the paperwork, the mundane requirements, because it's like your brain can't even think right, let alone think that you have to do all these things. And there are two organizations that have been supporting the work of Widowhood Real Talk with Tina. And if you reach out to #BuriedInWork and you mention the code Real Talk, they will provide you with a 10% discount for purchasing their products. And they have a very elaborate system. They have a lot of resources and a lot of connections. And people may say, well, I only have a few things. That's a few things that you don't want in probate, and people have to go through all these issues. You can make it simple. And I know it's hard to talk about death, but you're listening to this podcast already, so you've overcome that. So just get out of your feelings and know that just once you do it, most of the time you just may have to tighten it up a little bit. The other organization is called The Dead Book. And The Dead Book, it is a same version, but it may be on a smaller scale, because you may seem like, okay, I have something really complicated. I have a lot that's elaborate. I would really recommend that you look at Buried at Work. If you're looking at something a little bit more simplistic, a little bit something easier, encompassing, The Dead Book is going to be a really good option for you. You can reach out to me or them individually. And both of these gentlemen have lost parents, and they started this work because of the death of their parents and what they had to go through in doing the administrative work of their parents' estate. And so, yes, excellent comment about needing to do that. And there are resources to walk you through that. The Buried in Work, they have a couple of card games that you can play to kind of ask some questions to take the awkwardness out of it. But yes, definitely something that should be looked into.
So important. And a lot of people say like, oh, but it's expensive. I guarantee you what's more expensive is not doing it. And this is not paid. I don't work for any of these people. I have seen it in practice. I have heard the conversations. I have held space for the people that are like losing it because it was a mess on top of a mess and on top of a loss. And I guarantee you whatever you invest in this is going to be it's going to yield 10,000 times the peace of mind. And even like, for example, something I learned that I had no idea I live in the state of Florida. And I don't know if this is like at a federal level or just at a state level, but here, if you don't have a will, even medical care, I can't make decisions for my parents, let's say, or my husband, if they don't have a written will. The state makes decisions for them. So they get to decide in a life or death situation. They do the absolute bare minimum. And then the hospital says, well, the hospital's protocol is this. They don't have a will. So therefore, this is what we'll pull the plug or whatever. I don't mean to sound harsh or whatever. But when I heard that, I said, what? That's crazy. So the first thing that we did, it wasn't just for the assets. It was for medical care. And my parents are now leaving me instructions. I'm the sole child now. So it's like, my dad gave me his wishes. My mom gave me her wishes. They gave me the power of attorney. They said, this is what we want. These are the assets we have. And I was like, you can never give me a Christmas or birthday gift ever again. That's the biggest gift you could have given me, because for me to make those decisions on my own as a remaining child is one of the things that like gives me so much anxiety about, like, I'm going to have to face, assuming, they go before me and, natural causes or whatever happens. I'm going to be the one left behind. How am I going to make these decisions on my own? So, the fact that it's all written out is a gift in and of itself. And very quickly, I know we're like running over time here. I love this. I could talk to you forever. On the mental health side, so grief in and of itself is not a mental health condition. However, if you suffer from like depression or anxiety, or your behaviors, like you self-isolate, you mentioned this in one of your posts, if you self-isolate and that estrangement from society, from friends, family, and support starts growing into something that could potentially end up being harmful, or if you have some behaviors where you abuse certain substances, whether it be alcohol, drugs, or whatever, your behaviors following a loss can eventually turn into something that requires medical intervention and or a mental illness. So it's not that grief causes mental illness. It's just that the actions you take or don't take, and following a loss, can eventually work against you. Let's just say it that way.
Thank you for elaborating in that, because it is very true. Any other questions for me?
I will save those for when you're in my podcast, if that's okay.
That is perfectly fine.
Yes.
I want to say thank you. I know that you hold dear your story of Joseph. I know you do not, just because someone asks you to be on their podcast, it's not going to go, and you're like, let me see a second. And I appreciate the intentionality in doing that. And thank you for honoring me and knowing that this is a trusted and safe space to share your story, and know that this is a place that would be honored. I would like for you to close out this conversation with your final remarks.
Sometimes when I get carte blanche, it's like, I don't know what to say, but thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for answering your calling. Thank you for providing the space for grievers, for these conversations to take place, for the education. And this is a gift that keeps on giving. I do believe that. If there was ever a time to have these conversations, it is now. If there was ever a time to hold space for each other, it is now. And so you embodying your role in all of this is powerful medicine in ways known and unknown. I keep repeating that phrase, but it's, the ripple effect is beautiful. I like to be selective with the people that I interview, because it is so near and dear to my heart. And as somebody who doesn't handle these conversations with care, it could actually be harmful. So I appreciate you like handling it with so much grace and care and love and everything. And if you're a griever, you are not alone. Your unique circumstances are very unique to you. And in that regard, yes, it is a lonely journey, but there are many of us. There are communities of grievers providing resources and voicing out this real lived experience. So if you don't have the energy to get through another day, borrow ours from our podcast episodes, from the resources we provide, and from the stories that are shared in our beautiful spaces. If you'd like to get a hold of me, it's griefandlight.com. And thank you. And brother, wherever you are, I love you so much.
Thank you for being here. Talk to you later, Widowhood.
Thank you for spending another episode with Widowhood Real Talk. If you found the contents of today helpful, share the episode to anyone you know who may need it. Subscribe to the show and tune into Widowhood Real Talk each week. Then visit widowhood-realtalkwithtina.org to join the community and access additional resources. Remember, you are not alone in this journey.